A man driving through a storm spots a pregnant horse lying unconscious by the side of the road. With no one else around, he makes a split-second decision that will change everything. What started as a desperate attempt to save her life leads to an incredible journey of healing, redemption, and a legacy he never expected to carry. And how did this simple act of kindness reshape his entire future? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The windshield wipers fought against the heavy rain as Sam Morris guided his 18-wheeler down the dark highway. His eyes burned from the long hours behind the wheel, and his thoughts drifted like the shadows dancing in his headlights. The clock on his dashboard read 2:17 a.m. Another glamorous night on the road, he muttered, adjusting his position in the worn driver's seat. The rain intensified, drumming against the truck's metal roof. Through the downpour, a road sign caught his eye. Miller County, 5 miles. His father's farm lay just off the main road there, a property he hadn't seen since the funeral 6 months ago. Sam's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The farm had been in their family for 3 generations, but his father had let it waste away. Now it was his problem, another burden he didn't need. I should at least check on it, he said to himself, though the words felt hollow in the empty cab. Making up his mind, Sam signaled and took the exit. The rural road was rough, full of potholes that made his truck bounce and sway. The rain had turned into sheets now, reducing visibility to just a few feet ahead. As he rounded a bend, his headlights swept across something large by the roadside. Sam squinted through the rain-streaked windshield. At first, he thought it was a fallen tree, but as he drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was a horse, lying motionless in the mud. Sam pulled over, his hazard lights cutting through the darkness with steady orange blinks. Grabbing his raincoat from behind the seat, he climbed down from the cab. The rain immediately soaked through his jeans as he approached the animal. The horse was a light bay, its coat slick with mud and rain. Sam's heart pounded as he knelt beside it, gently touching its neck. A faint warmth met his fingers, and he saw the slight rise and fall of breathing. "Hey there," he said softly, relief flooding through him. "What happened to you?" The horse's eye rolled toward him, showing white around the edges. It was alive, but clearly exhausted or hurt. Sam ran back to his truck, remembering the tarp he kept for covering loads. It took him several minutes to dig it out, along with some tie-down straps he used for securing cargo. Working quickly in the pounding rain, he spread the tarp beside the horse. His boots slipped in the mud as he positioned the straps underneath the animal. Years of loading and securing freight had taught him about leverage and balance. But this was different. The horse was heavy, and he had to be careful not to cause it more harm. "Easy now," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the horse or himself. Using the straps as a makeshift sling, Sam managed to drag the horse onto the tarp. The animal didn't fight him, which worried him even more. He secured the tarp's edges with the remaining straps, creating a crude cradle. It took all his strength to winch the horse into the bed of his pickup truck, which he'd parked as close as possible. By the time he finished, his muscles screamed in protest, and he was soaked to the bone. Sam climbed into the cab, water dripping from his clothes onto the seat. Through his rearview mirror, he could just make out the dark shape of the horse under the tarp. The farm was only a few miles ahead, and he knew there was an old barn there. It wasn't much, but it was better than leaving the animal to die in the rain. Sam guided his truck down the overgrown driveway, branches scraping against the sides as he pushed through years of neglect. The headlights cut through the darkness, revealing the slouching shape of the old barn and the weathered farmhouse beyond it. Paint peeled from both buildings like old scabs, and the barn door hung crooked on its rusted track. He backed the truck as close to the barn as possible, the tires squelching in the mud. Inside the barn, the air was thick with dust and the musty smell of abandoned hay. Sam's flashlight beam bounced off cobwebs and scattered pieces of broken equipment. He found a stall that seemed sturdy enough, its floor still covered with old straw. Working carefully, Sam managed to drag the horse into the stall using the tarp. The animal's breathing was shallow, but steady. In the beam of his flashlight, he could see scrapes along its flanks and a swollen knee. "Hold on," he muttered, hurrying toward the farmhouse. The screen door creaked as he entered, and his boots left muddy prints on the warped floorboards. The house felt like a museum of failure. His father's attempt at maintaining the family legacy reduced to empty rooms and layer upon layer of dust. In the kitchen, Sam found an ancient first aid kit under the sink and a bottle of water that seemed clean enough. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out his phone and searched for the nearest veterinarian. The call connected after 3 rings. "Large Animal Emergency Services," a tired voice answered. "I found an injured horse on the road," Sam explained quickly. "I've got it in a barn off Route 27 at the old Morris place." "I'm sorry, sir, but with this storm, the roads are becoming impassable. The earliest I could get there would be morning." Sam's heart sank. "But the horse needs help now." "Keep it warm and quiet. Check for bleeding or obvious injuries. That's all you can do until I get there." After hanging up, Sam gathered what supplies he could find. Some clean rags, a bucket he'd rinsed out, and the first aid kit. Back in the barn, he knelt beside the horse. Its coat was caked with mud, but he couldn't find any serious wounds, just scrapes and bruises. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted aloud, gently cleaning the worst of the scratches with water and a rag. The horse's eyes were half closed, but occasionally they would roll toward him, watching. Hours passed. The storm showed no signs of letting up, its fury rattling the barn's old boards. Sam sat on the straw-covered floor, his back against the stall wall. The horse's breathing had remained steady, but he had no way of knowing if that was good enough. Why had he stopped? The question nagged at him as he listened to the rain. He could have called someone else to help, could have kept driving and met his delivery deadline. Instead, here he was, sitting in his father's failed barn, trying to save a horse he knew nothing about. His father's presence seemed to linger in every shadow of the barn, in every creak of the old timber. The place had meant everything to his grandfather, but his father had let it slip away, board by board, acre by acre. Now Sam sat in what remained, feeling the weight of 3 generations pressing down on him like the darkness itself. The first rays of morning light filtered through the barn's weathered boards, casting thin golden lines across the straw-covered floor. Sam blinked awake, his neck stiff from sleeping against the stall wall. His eyes immediately went to the horse, who lay quietly in the straw. She was alive. He could see the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice rough from sleep. The horse's ears twitched at his words, and her dark eyes opened to look at him. "I think I'll call you Willow. You kind of remind me of that old willow tree that used to be out front." Sam filled the bucket with fresh water from the bottle he'd found last night. He approached carefully, holding it out. Willow lifted her head slightly, but seemed too weak to drink. Sam bit his lip, then cupped his hands to bring some water to her mouth. Most of it spilled down his arms, but she managed a few sips. He was examining a particularly nasty scrape on her flank when a sharp knock echoed through the barn. Sam jumped, nearly dropping his flashlight. "Hello? Is someone in there?" A woman's voice called out. Sam opened the barn door to find an elderly woman in rubber boots and a rain jacket standing there, her silver hair tied back in a neat bun. Her eyes narrowed as she looked him up and down. "You're Jack Morris's boy, aren't you?" she asked, her tone suspicious. "I saw the lights last night. This place has been empty for years." "Yes, ma'am, I'm Sam Morris," he replied, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I found an injured horse on the road last night and brought her here. It was the closest shelter I could think of." The woman's expression softened immediately. "A horse? Where is it?" Sam led her to the stall where Willow lay. The woman knelt down beside the horse with surprising agility, her hands moving expertly over the animal's body. "I'm Martha Stewart," she said as she worked. "I used to train horses, had my own business just down the road. Known your family for years." She looked up at Sam. "This mare is pregnant." Sam's mouth fell open. "Pregnant? Are you sure?" Martha nodded, her face serious. "About 7 months along, I'd say. That's going to complicate things." She stood up, brushing straw from her knees. "The scrapes aren't too bad, but she's exhausted and dehydrated. We need to get some electrolytes in her." "The vet still hasn't called back," Sam admitted, feeling overwhelmed. "Roads are probably still blocked from the storm," Martha said. "I've got some supplies at home. I'll bring them over later to check on her." She patted Sam's arm. "You did good, getting her out of that rain. But looking after a pregnant mare, that's not something you want to tackle alone." Sam looked down at Willow, who had closed her eyes again. A small spark of hope flickered in his chest, but doubt quickly followed. He didn't know the first thing about horses, let alone pregnant ones. What had he gotten himself into? The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Sam began clearing years of debris from the barn. Loose boards, rusty tools, and moldy hay littered the floor. Following Martha's instructions from earlier, he focused on making the space around Willow's stall clean and safe. In the back corner, Sam discovered an old bag of hay, more dust and rot than feed. He wrinkled his nose at the smell. "This won't do," he muttered, adding it to the growing pile of trash outside. Willow needed proper food and supplies, which meant a trip into town. The bell above the door chimed as Sam entered Johnson's feed store. The familiar smell of grain and leather filled the air. As he walked down an aisle of horse supplies, voices drifted from behind a stack of feed bags. "Did you hear someone's finally at the Morris place?" a woman asked. "About time," another voice replied. "Such a shame what happened to that farm. Jack's parents did such good work there, taking in all those injured animals. Remember that 3-legged deer they nursed back to health?" "Yeah, and those abandoned horses they rescued. Place was like a sanctuary." The woman sighed. "Then Jack inherited it and let it all go to waste. Broke his parents' hearts, I heard." Sam's chest tightened as he pretended to study a bag of feed. He'd known his grandparents ran some kind of animal rescue, but he'd never realized how much it had meant to the community. His father never talked about it, or about much else, really. With a cart full of hay, feed, and basic supplies, Sam headed back to the farm. The weight of the townspeople's words sat heavy in his mind. When he pulled up to the barn, he found Martha already there, unloading boxes from her truck. "Good timing," she called out, carrying a bucket of supplies toward the barn. "I brought some electrolytes and medications that might help." Together, they worked to make Willow comfortable. Martha showed Sam how to mix the electrolytes into water and how to properly clean the mare's wounds. Willow seemed stronger today, lifting her head to drink on her own. "Your grandmother would have loved this," Martha said softly, as they watched Willow eat fresh hay. "She always said every animal deserved a chance." The setting sun painted the barn in warm orange light as Sam and Martha finished their work. Sitting on an old wooden crate, Sam watched Willow. Something about her quiet strength, her will to survive, touched something in him. Looking around the barn, he could almost picture what it had been like in his grandparents' time, a place of healing and hope. For the first time since inheriting the farm, Sam felt a small spark of connection to this place, to its history. It wasn't just his father's failed legacy anymore. It was something more. The next morning's chill crept through Sam's jacket as he made his way to the barn. The sun hadn't quite risen, painting the sky in soft purples and pinks. Inside, Willow's ears twitched at his approach, a small but encouraging sign of improvement. "Morning, girl," he said softly, approaching her stall. She lifted her head slightly, her eyes more alert than they'd been yesterday. Sam checked her water bucket and replaced the old hay with fresh. As he worked his way through the barn, clearing out more debris, a glint of metal caught his eye in one of the corner stalls. Pushing aside several moldy hay bales, he discovered an old wooden chest, its brass fittings dulled with age. The lid creaked as he opened it, releasing the musty smell of forgotten memories. Inside, black and white photographs lay scattered among various tools and leather items. Sam picked up one photo, dust falling from its edges. It showed a much younger version of his grandfather standing proudly beside a beautiful black horse. The animal's leg was wrapped in bandages, but its head was held high. Beneath the photos, Sam found a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth from handling, and his grandfather's name was written in faded ink on the first page. Sam sat down on an overturned bucket and began to read. April 15th, 1975. Brought in another injured mare today. Sarah says I'm taking on too much, but how can I turn away an animal in need? There's something special about helping these creatures heal. They have such dignity, such strength. When they recover and return to full health, it makes all the late nights worth it. Sam's throat tightened as he read entry after entry. His grandfather wrote about each animal with such care and detail, their personalities, their struggles, their triumphs. The journal painted a picture of a man devoted to giving second chances to abandoned and injured animals. One entry made Sam pause. Sometimes I worry about Jack. He doesn't seem to understand why I spend so much time with the animals. He says it's just a waste of money. But healing isn't about money. It's about doing what's right. I hope someday he'll understand. The words stung. Sam remembered his father's dismissive attitude whenever the farm came up in conversation. Now he understood the weight of what had been lost when his father abandoned the sanctuary. Taking the journal with him, Sam walked back to the farmhouse as evening approached. He placed it carefully on his nightstand next to the reading lamp. After a simple dinner, he settled into bed and opened the journal again. His grandfather's words flowed across the pages, full of compassion and wisdom. Stories of midnight rescues, challenging recoveries, and moments of breakthrough filled each entry. Sam felt a connection growing, not just to the grandfather he barely remembered, but to the purpose that had once filled these walls. One passage particularly caught his attention. Every animal that comes through our gate has a story. Our job isn't just to heal their bodies, it's to help them trust again, to show them that kindness still exists in this world. Sometimes I think they heal us as much as we heal them. The rumble of a truck on the gravel driveway pulled Sam's attention away from cleaning Willow's stall. Through the barn doors, he saw a white veterinary vehicle parking beside his truck. Dr. Harper emerged, medical bag in hand, her boots squelching in the mud as she made her way to the barn. "Mr. Morris?" she called out, her voice steady and professional. "I'm Dr. Harper. Sorry about the delay. That storm really did a number on the roads." Sam led her to Willow's stall, where the horse lay on fresh hay. Dr. Harper's experienced hands moved gently over Willow's body, checking vital signs and looking for injuries. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes showed concern as she completed her examination. "She's definitely pregnant," Dr. Harper confirmed, straightening up. "I'd estimate about 8 months along. She's severely malnourished, which puts both her and the foal at risk, but she's stable for now. You did the right thing bringing her in from the rain." Sam watched as Dr. Harper pulled several items from her bag: vitamin supplements, medications, and a chart. She spread them out on a clean section of the stall wall. "These need to be given twice daily," she explained, holding up 2 bottles. "Mix them with her feed. She'll need constant access to fresh water and good quality hay." Dr. Harper demonstrated the proper amounts, making sure Sam understood each instruction. "The biggest concern right now is getting her strength up before she gives birth," she continued. "Watch for any signs of distress: heavy breathing, sweating, or unusual restlessness. Labor complications are a real possibility given her condition." Sam's stomach knotted at the thought. "What should I do if something goes wrong?" "Keep my number handy," Dr. Harper replied, handing him her card. "Call immediately if you notice anything unusual. Day or night, I mean it." As they walked back to her truck, Dr. Harper paused and turned to Sam. "You know, most people would have driven right past her in that storm. What you did," she gestured toward the barn, "that took real compassion." Sam felt his face warm at the unexpected praise. "I just couldn't leave her there," he said quietly. "Well, sometimes that's all it takes, just not looking the other way." Dr. Harper smiled. "I'll check back in a few days, but call if you need anything before then." As he watched the veterinary truck disappear down the driveway, Sam felt a small surge of pride, quickly followed by waves of doubt. The list of instructions in his hand suddenly seemed overwhelming. He wasn't sure he was cut out for this level of responsibility, but Willow's life, and her foal's, now depended on him getting it right. Sam's phone buzzed as he finished mixing Willow's morning feed. He recognized his boss's number, and his stomach tightened. "Where are you, Morris? You were supposed to be back on the road 2 days ago," Bill barked through the speaker. "I had a family emergency," Sam explained, watching Willow nibble at her hay. "Just need a few more days to—" "Few more days? Are you kidding me?" Bill's voice rose. "Listen, we've been understanding about your situation since your father passed, but we're running a business here. Every day you're not moving freight is costing us money." "I understand, but—" "No buts. Either you're back en route by tomorrow morning or I'm docking your pay. And if this stretches any longer, we'll have to reconsider your position entirely." The line went dead before Sam could respond. He slumped against the barn wall, running a hand through his hair. The steady paycheck from trucking had been his safety net for years. Now it felt like a chain around his neck. Martha arrived later that afternoon, carrying a basket of apples and carrots for Willow. Sam helped her chop them into smaller pieces as he explained his situation. "Sometimes life presents us with choices that seem impossible," Martha said, her weathered hands steady as she sliced a carrot. "When my Robert passed, everyone told me to sell the training business. Said it was too much for a widow to handle alone." She paused, a distant look in her eyes. "But those horses, they were more than just animals to me. They were my passion, my purpose." "What did you do?" Sam asked. "I scaled back, took fewer clients. Money was tight for a while, but I never regretted choosing what felt right in my heart." She looked at him directly. "The safe choice isn't always the right one, Sam." That evening, Sam sat in the farmhouse's musty living room, his grandfather's journal open on his lap. The pages were worn, but the writing was clear and determined. "Another tough winter ahead. Feed prices are up, and the bank's breathing down my neck about the mortgage. But today, we brought in a mare someone found abandoned in the snow. Seeing her recover, watching her trust return, that's worth more than any amount in my bank account. This place isn't just a farm. It's a sanctuary, a promise to these animals that someone cares enough to fight for them. Sam closed the journal, his grandfather's words echoing in his mind. The life he'd built as a trucker was predictable, secure, but sitting here, with Willow depending on him and his grandfather's legacy surrounding him, that life suddenly felt hollow. He stood by the window, watching the barn where Willow rested, feeling caught between two worlds. The weather alert blared from Sam's phone, warning of an approaching thunderstorm. He rushed to find Martha, who was already heading toward the barn with armfuls of supplies. "We need to check the roof," Martha called out, her gray hair whipping in the rising wind. "These old barns can leak something terrible in heavy rain." Together, they worked methodically through a checklist Martha had created. Sam climbed into the hayloft, patching holes with pieces of corrugated metal they'd found in the storage shed. Martha stayed below, organizing emergency supplies and checking on Willow. "Hand me that hammer," Sam called down. As Martha passed it up, she smiled at his determined expression. "You remind me of your grandfather right now," she said. "He'd be up there doing the exact same thing, making sure every animal was safe and dry." Sam paused his work, looking down at her. What were they really like? My grandparents? Martha's eyes softened as she began laying fresh straw in Willow's stall. They were the heart of this town. Every time there was an animal in trouble, people knew they could bring it here. Your grandmother would organize fundraisers when feed got expensive, and your grandfather never turned away an animal in need. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Martha continued working. "You know, I had my own training business back then. Worked with some of the most troubled horses you could imagine. Your grandparents always supported me, sent clients my way." She sighed, brushing hay from her jacket. "After Robert died, I just lost heart. Sold most of the horses, kept only a few. Some days I wonder what might have been if I'd fought harder to keep it going." Sam climbed down from the loft, studying Martha's face. "Why didn't you?" Fear, mostly. Seemed easier to let it go than risk failing. She met his eyes. "But watching you these past few days, seeing how you jumped in to help Willow without a second thought, it reminds me of what's possible when you follow your heart instead of your fears." The first heavy drops of rain began hitting the barn roof as they finished their preparations. Martha headed home, leaving Sam alone with Willow. He pulled up a stool beside her stall, listening to the steady drumming of rain above. Willow's coat gleamed in the lantern light, looking healthier than when he'd first found her. As he reached out to stroke her mane, she leaned into his touch, something she'd never done before. The farm had always felt like a weight around his neck, a reminder of his father's failures. But sitting here now, Sam began to see something different. He saw the potential in the weathered walls, the empty stalls, the overgrown paddocks. This wasn't just his father's abandoned property. It was his grandparents' legacy of compassion and purpose. Willow turned her head toward him and let out a soft, gentle nicker. The sound settled something in Sam's chest, like a key turning in a lock. For the first time since inheriting the farm, he felt not obligation, but possibility. The morning sun streamed through the patched barn roof, casting warm squares of light across the hay-strewn floor. Sam stepped inside, his boots crunching on scattered straw, and felt a wave of relief wash over him. The barn had weathered the storm perfectly. Their preparations had paid off. "Morning, girl," he called out to Willow. The horse lifted her head, ears perking forward at the sound of his voice. Her eyes seemed brighter today, more alert than they'd been since he'd found her on that rainy night. Sam went through the morning routine that was becoming familiar, filling her water bucket, measuring out feed, and checking her stall. Each task felt less like a chore and more like a natural rhythm. He noticed with satisfaction that Willow's coat was beginning to show signs of improvement, the dull, matted fur slowly giving way to a healthier sheen. The barn door creaked open, and Martha stepped in, carrying something in her arms. "Thought I'd find you here," she said, smiling. In her hands was an old leather bridle, the brass fittings tarnished but still beautiful. "This belonged to Shadow," Martha said, running her fingers over the worn leather. "He was one of my first rescue cases. Came to me wild as could be. Wouldn't let anyone near him. Took months of patience, but he turned into the gentlest soul you'd ever meet." She held out the bridle to Sam. "I want you to have it. Maybe someday, when Willow's stronger, you can use it." Sam took the bridle carefully, touched by the gesture. "What happened to Shadow?" he asked softly. "Lived to be 28, Martha replied, her eyes distant with memory. "Taught dozens of kids to ride. Every one of them loved him." She turned to look at Willow. "That's the thing about rescue horses. They never forget the kindness you show them. They give it back tenfold." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as Willow methodically worked her way through a pile of fresh hay. Sam found himself mesmerized by the gentle movement of her jaw, the occasional swish of her tail. It struck him how different this felt from his first night in the barn, when he'd been overwhelmed with uncertainty and doubt. "You know," he said, "I used to check on her because I felt like I had to. Now I look forward to it. Seeing her get stronger each day, watching her personality come out bit by bit. It's become the best part of my day." Martha nodded, a knowing smile on her face. "That's how it starts. One day you're just doing what needs to be done, and the next thing you know, you can't imagine doing anything else." Willow lifted her head from the hay, stretching her neck to sniff curiously at the old bridle in Sam's hands. Her whiskers tickled his fingers, and he found himself grinning at her gentle investigation. This wasn't the same frightened, half-dead horse he'd found by the roadside. Day by day, she was becoming something more, and maybe Sam realized so was he. Sam pulled his truck into the feed store's gravel parking lot, the familiar crunch of stones under his tires a stark contrast to the unfamiliar task ahead. Through the store's large front windows, he could see several customers inside, their heads turning as they noticed his vehicle. Inside, the smell of fresh hay and grain filled the air. Sam grabbed a cart and started loading it with supplies for Willow, consulting the list Martha had helped him write. As he moved through the aisles, conversations would suddenly hush, followed by whispered exchanges and quick glances in his direction. "You're Sam Morris, aren't you?" A friendly voice broke through his concentration. The store clerk, a middle-aged man with weathered hands and kind eyes, stood nearby. "I'm Tom. Used to know your grandparents pretty well." "Yeah, that's me," Sam replied, shifting uncomfortably under the attention. "Haven't seen much activity out at that farm in years," Tom said, helping Sam select the right type of feed. "Got plans for the place?" Sam hesitated, his hand resting on a bag of grain. Well, there's this horse I found. She's pregnant and needed help. I've been taking care of her." Tom's face lit up. "A rescue horse? Just like the old days." He leaned against the counter. "You know, that farm used to mean something to folks around here. People would bring injured animals from miles around, knowing your grandparents would never turn them away. It was more than just a farm. It was hope with a roof on it. That's what my mother used to say." The drive back to the farm seemed shorter than usual as Sam mulled over Tom's words. He found Martha waiting by the barn, ready to help unload the supplies. "The whole town's talking," Sam said, handing her a bag of feed. "About the farm, about Willow. The store clerk, Tom. He remembered when my grandparents ran the place." Martha set down the feed bag and turned to face him. "Of course they remember. This wasn't just any farm, Sam. It was a sanctuary. For animals and people, too. Folks knew if they had nowhere else to turn, your grandparents would help somehow." She gestured at the worn buildings around them. "It could be that again, you know. Different, maybe, but just as meaningful. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to open their heart, like you did with Willow." Sam looked around at the property, seeing it through new eyes. The peeling paint and sagging fences suddenly looked less like decay and more like possibility. The evening air grew cool as Sam settled onto a wooden crate in the barn, Willow's gentle breathing providing a soothing backdrop. He pulled his grandfather's journal from his jacket pocket, running his fingers over the worn leather cover. The barn's single light bulb cast a warm glow as he opened to where he'd left off the night before. The pages revealed stories that made his heart race. His grandfather wrote about a mare named Storm, rescued during the flood of '82. She'd been found trapped on a small island of high ground, terrified and half-starved. "Some said we were foolish to risk so much for one horse," his grandfather had written, "but every life matters." Storm went on to become a champion jumper, winning ribbons at state competitions. Sam glanced at Willow, wondering what untold potential lay within her. The journal continued with tales of other rescues: a blind foal that learned to navigate by sound, a retired police horse that helped teach children to ride, and dozens more stories of second chances. Intrigued by mentions of the farm's layout, Sam stood and began exploring the barn's shadowy corners more carefully. Behind some old feed bins, he discovered a dusty box filled with trophies. He wiped one clean with his sleeve, revealing Storm's name engraved in the brass. Photographs spilled out from beneath the awards, images of smiling people standing proudly next to healthy, gleaming horses. At the bottom of the box, Sam found a rolled-up paper, carefully protected in a plastic sleeve. He gently unfurled it to reveal detailed blueprints for the barn. The plan showed an expansion that would have doubled the facility's size, with specialized areas for rehabilitation and training. Notes in his grandfather's handwriting filled the margins, describing dreams of helping even more animals in need. Sam spread the blueprint across an old work table, studying the careful measurements and thoughtful design. The barn he stood in now was just a shadow of what it could have been, of what it still could be. His eyes traced the drawn lines of stalls and paddocks, training rings and recovery areas. For the first time, he could see the farm's true potential through his grandfather's eyes. Returning to his seat, Sam picked up the journal again. The weight of it felt different now, heavier with possibility. His grandfather's words spoke of purpose and dedication, of early mornings and late nights, of challenges met with determination. The legacy of this place wasn't just in the buildings or the land. It was in the countless lives touched and transformed. Looking around the barn, Sam felt both proud and overwhelmed. The path his grandfather had carved was impressive, almost intimidatingly so. But as he watched Willow shift in her stall, seeking a more comfortable position, he realized he didn't have to rebuild everything at once. Maybe like his grandfather, he could start with just one horse, one day at a time. The morning sun had barely risen when Sam noticed something was wrong with Willow. She paced restlessly in her stall, her sides heaving with labored breaths. Her usual calm demeanor had been replaced by obvious discomfort, and she kept turning to look at her swollen belly. "Martha!" Sam called out as soon as she arrived for her daily visit. "Something's not right with Willow." Martha hurried over, her experienced eyes taking in the horse's condition. "Let me have a look at her," she said, entering the stall carefully. After a few minutes of gentle examination, she pulled out her phone. "We should call Dr. Harper, just to be safe." The vet listened carefully to their description of Willow's symptoms over speakerphone. "It sounds like normal pregnancy discomfort," Dr. Harper assured them. "But keep a close eye on her temperature and appetite. Call me immediately if anything changes dramatically." While Martha stayed with Willow, Sam climbed up to check the barn's roof. The last storm had torn loose several shingles, and water was beginning to seep through in places. He could see where the old wood was starting to rot, another problem that needed immediate attention. "Sam," Martha called from below, "could you bring down some fresh water for Willow?" He glanced at the roof, then at his watch. There weren't enough hours in the day for everything that needed doing. Climbing down, he filled a fresh bucket and carried it to Willow's stall. "You look worried," Martha observed, watching him fret between checking on Willow and eyeing the roof. "I don't know how to do it all," Sam admitted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Every time I fix one thing, 3 more problems pop up. And now, with Willow not feeling well—" Martha placed a weathered hand on his arm. "That's farm life for you. It's not about getting everything perfect. It's about learning to weather the storms, both literal and figurative." She smiled. "The animals teach us patience if we're willing to learn." Sam spent the afternoon alternating between repair work and checking on Willow. By evening, he had managed to patch the worst of the roof damage, though he knew it was just a temporary fix. His muscles ached from the physical labor, but there was still one more task before he could rest. In the quiet of the night, Sam made his final check on Willow. The mare had settled down considerably, munching contentedly on her hay. Her eyes, warm and bright, followed him as he moved around her stall. Just weeks ago, he wouldn't have known the first thing about caring for a horse. Now he could read Willow's moods, understand her needs, and provide the care she required. Leaning against the stall door, Sam felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Despite the challenges and setbacks, despite his initial doubts, he was actually doing this. The skills that had seemed so foreign were becoming second nature. Maybe, just maybe, he was capable of more than he'd given himself credit for. Sam's phone buzzed during his morning coffee. His boss's name flashed on the screen, making his stomach tighten. He answered, already knowing what was coming. "Sam, we've been more than patient." His boss's gruff voice crackled through the speaker. "But we're losing customers. Either you're back on the road by Monday, or we'll have to let you go." The words hung heavy in the air. Sam rubbed his temples, thinking of the steady paycheck, the benefits, the security he'd built over years of long-haul driving. "I need an answer now, Sam. Are you coming back or not?" I'll let you know by tonight," Sam managed, his voice rough. After hanging up, he walked to the barn where Martha was checking on Willow. The mare's condition had improved significantly under their care, but she still needed constant attention. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Martha said, noting his troubled expression. Sam leaned against the stable door. "My boss called. I have to decide by tonight if I'm going back to trucking." He kicked at some loose hay. "I can't keep both balls in the air anymore." Martha brushed Willow's mane thoughtfully. "You know, when your father left this place to you, he might have been giving you more than just property." She turned to face Sam. "Maybe he was giving you a chance to choose a different path than the one you've been on." "But the farm's barely standing," Sam protested, "and I hardly know what I'm doing." "Neither did your grandfather when he started," Martha reminded him. "Sometimes the biggest opportunities come disguised as impossible challenges." That evening, Sam sat in the farmhouse's small kitchen, his grandfather's journal open before him. He found the entry he'd been thinking about all day. Quit my job at the factory today. Helen thinks I'm crazy, and maybe I am. But watching that first rescued mare give birth last spring changed something in me. I can't go back to punching the clock when I know what I'm meant to do. It won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. Sam pulled out a notepad and began writing. He listed immediate repairs needed, estimated costs, and potential sources of income. The numbers were daunting, but as he wrote, a vision began taking shape. Not just of preserving his grandfather's legacy, but of building something new. The list grew longer. Fix roof, repair fencing, clear pasture, research grants. He paused, pen hovering over the paper. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time since inheriting the farm, he felt a sense of purpose behind his uncertainty. Sam's hands trembled slightly as he pinned the notice to the feed store's bulletin board. Volunteers needed. Help restore Morris Family Farm. Stood out among the faded yard sale flyers and lost pet notices. He stepped back, already doubting himself. That's quite a project you're taking on, said Bill, the store owner, coming up behind him. Your grandparents' place used to be something special. Did you know them well? Sam asked. Bill nodded, adjusting his worn baseball cap. Used to deliver feed there twice a month. Your grandfather never turned away an animal in need. He studied the notice. I'll make sure folks see this. To Sam's amazement, his phone started ringing that very afternoon. By the end of the week, he had a list of people willing to help. Some remembered the farm from its better days, while others were simply curious about its revival. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather. Sam watched in disbelief as trucks and cars pulled into the gravel driveway. Martha stood beside him, beaming as people climbed out with tools and work gloves. Among them was Jake Miller, a lanky teenager whose eyes lit up at the sight of Willow. I've always wanted to work with horses, he told Sam eagerly. My mom says your grandparents used to help injured animals here. Is it true? Sam nodded, touched by the boy's enthusiasm. That's what we're hoping to do again. The volunteers spread across the property like a well-organized army. Some cleared overgrown brush, while others mended fences. Jake proved particularly helpful in the barn, showing a natural touch with Willow that impressed even Martha. That boy's got a gift, Martha whispered to Sam as they watched Jake carefully brush Willow's coat. Just like your grandfather had. By late afternoon, the farm had undergone a remarkable transformation. The barn looked cleaner than it had in years, and the fencing around the nearest pasture stood straight and strong. Martha and Sam had prepared a simple meal of sandwiches and lemonade. As the sun began its descent, everyone gathered in the cleaned-out barn. The volunteers sat on hay bales, sharing stories between bites. I remember when your grandmother would let us ride the gentler horses, one woman recalled. She taught half the kids in town how to ride. And remember the Christmas they hosted that holiday festival for the shelter animals? Another added. Must have found homes for 20 dogs that day. Sam listened, seeing the farm through new eyes. These weren't just strangers helping out. They were people who carried pieces of his family's legacy in their memories. For the first time since inheriting the property, he felt truly connected to its history and its potential. Jake approached him with a hopeful expression. Mr. Morris, could I maybe come back sometimes to help with Willow? Sam glanced at Martha, who gave an approving nod. We could definitely use the help, he said, watching the teenager's face light up. As the gathering continued, Sam looked around at the laughing, chatting volunteers. The barn that had felt so empty and overwhelming just weeks ago now hummed with warmth and possibility. He finally understood what his grandfather's journal meant about building something meaningful. It wasn't just about the buildings or the animals, but about creating a place where people could come together to make a difference. Sam's morning routine of feeding Willow was interrupted when he noticed something wrong. Usually eager for her breakfast, the mare lay listlessly in her stall, barely acknowledging his presence. Her eyes seemed dull, and her breathing appeared labored. "Something's not right," he muttered, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. Dr. Harper answered on the second ring, and within an hour her truck was pulling into the driveway. The vet's expression grew serious as she examined Willow. "These could be early labor signs," she said, running her hands along Willow's swollen belly. "But it's too soon. The foal needs more time to develop." Sam's stomach tightened. "What can we do?" "We'll start her on some medication to try to delay labor," Dr. Harper explained, preparing a syringe. "But you need to understand. There could be complications. The next 24 hours are critical." Sam barely left Willow's side all day. He sat on an overturned bucket, watching every breath she took. Martha arrived mid-morning with coffee and sandwiches, though Sam could barely eat. "I've seen mares pull through worse," Martha said softly, settling beside him. "Back in '82, I had a rescue horse named Belle. Everyone said she wouldn't make it, but that stubborn girl proved them wrong. Her foal turned out to be one of the strongest I ever trained." Dr. Harper returned in the afternoon to check Willow's progress. "The medication seems to be helping," she said, "but keep watching for any changes. If her condition worsens, call me immediately, day or night." As evening approached, Sam remained in the barn. The setting sun cast long shadows through the barn doors, and the air grew cooler. He pulled his jacket tighter and moved closer to Willow, gently stroking her mane. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of you are going to be fine. I promise I'll do whatever it takes." Willow's ear twitched at the sound of his voice, and she let out a soft nicker. Sam continued talking to her, sharing stories from his grandfather's journal and his growing dreams for the farm. "This place is going to be special again," he murmured. "And you're a big part of that. So you just focus on staying strong, okay?" The barn grew darker, but Sam couldn't bring himself to leave. He settled in for a long night, determined to keep his promise to watch over Willow and her unborn foal. Dark clouds loomed on the horizon as Sam hurried around the barn, checking every board and beam. The weather alert on his phone had warned of severe thunderstorms approaching, and his hands trembled slightly as he hammered another support into place. Inside Willow's stall, he triple-checked the bedding, making sure it was deep and dry. The pregnant mare watched him with tired eyes as he patched a small hole in the roof above her. "Can't have any leaks getting to you," he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. The first rumble of thunder made him jump. Sam glanced at his phone again. No signal. His chest tightened as he realized how isolated they'd be during the storm. What if Willow needed help? What if something went wrong with the pregnancy? Back in the farmhouse, Sam paced the worn floorboards. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical burden. He wasn't a vet, wasn't even a proper farmer, just a truck driver who'd stumbled into this situation by chance. His phone sat on the kitchen table, his boss's number still saved in the contacts. One call could put him back on familiar ground, back to the predictable rhythm of highways and delivery schedules. His finger hovered over the number. But then he thought about how Willow now lifted her head when he entered the barn, how she'd started to trust him. He remembered the volunteers who'd shown up to help, believing in his vision for the farm. The phone slipped back into his pocket, uncalled. The storm arrived in full force as Sam sat on the covered porch, watching sheets of rain hammer the ground. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the barn in stark bursts. Each crack of thunder made him worry about Willow. He barely noticed Martha's arrival until she settled into the chair beside him, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. "Thought you could use some tea," she said, passing him one. "I don't know if I can do this, Martha," Sam admitted, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not enough?" Martha took a slow sip of her tea before answering. You know, when I first started training horses, I was terrified. Thought I'd mess up and hurt them somehow. But look how far you've come already. From someone who barely knew which end of a horse was which to someone who's given Willow a real chance at life. But, Sam started to protest. Doubt is natural, Martha cut in gently. It means you care enough to worry. But don't let it stop you from seeing what's right in front of you. You're doing good here, Sam. Real good. Sam watched the rain fall, considering her words. Despite his fears, he knew he couldn't walk away now. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them. The storm grew fiercer as night fell, howling winds rattling the barn's weathered boards. Sam's flashlight beam cut through the darkness as he made his hourly check on Willow. The mare paced her stall restlessly, her sides heaving with labored breaths. Easy, girl, Sam murmured, reaching out to stroke her neck. She flinched at another thunderclap, and Sam noticed her muscles tensing unnaturally. Something wasn't right. By midnight, Willow's condition had deteriorated significantly. She lay down and got up repeatedly, pawing at the straw bedding. Sam's hand shook as he dialed Dr. Harper's number. The bridges are flooded, Dr. Harper's voice crackled through the poor connection. I can't get there for several hours at least. Keep her calm and watch for any discharge or water breaking. Sam's stomach dropped as the call cut out. He tried Martha next, his voice tight with panic as he explained the situation. I'll be right over, Martha said without hesitation. Despite the dangerous weather, she arrived 15 minutes later, soaked but determined. We need to keep her comfortable, Martha instructed, helping Sam spread fresh bedding. Talk to her softly. Keep her drinking water if she'll take it. They worked together in the dim light of battery-powered lanterns. Martha showed Sam how to recognize signs of distress and taught him breathing exercises to keep himself calm, for Willow's sake. Animals can sense our anxiety, she explained, demonstrating how to stroke Willow's neck in long, steady movements. The calmer you are, the calmer she'll be. The hours crawled by. Sam's clothes were soaked through from his repeated trips to the house for supplies. His muscles ached from tension, but he couldn't bring himself to leave Willow's side for more than a few minutes at a time. Lightning illuminated the barn in harsh flashes, followed by deafening thunder that made Willow trembling. Sam sat beside her, speaking softly and continuously, telling her about his grandfather's journal entries and his growing dreams for the farm. Martha dozed in the corner, but woke at every sound of distress from Willow. Together, they monitored her temperature and breathing, doing everything they could with their limited resources. As the storm raged on, Sam felt the full weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. This wasn't just about saving one horse anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could handle whatever challenges came his way. His clothes were drenched, his body exhausted, but his resolve remained unshaken. He would see Willow through this night, no matter what it took. The first rays of dawn pierced through the barn's weathered slats, bringing with them a welcome silence as the storm finally passed. Dr. Harper's truck splashed through puddles as she pulled up to the barn, medical supplies in tow. Sam's shoulders sagged with relief at her arrival. After examining Willow carefully, Dr. Harper's expression turned serious. The foal is positioned awkwardly, and Willow's still weak from malnutrition. We need to prepare for a difficult delivery. Sam's throat tightened. What do you need us to do? The next few hours became a blur of activity. Dr. Harper directed Sam and Martha like a general commanding troops, having them clear the stall and lay fresh straw. They hung additional lanterns, set up a table for medical supplies, and filled buckets with clean water. Keep these towels within reach, Dr. Harper instructed, arranging her instruments. When I call for something, I need it immediately. Martha showed Sam how to properly sanitize the equipment, her steady hands guiding his trembling ones. Deep breaths, she reminded him. Willow needs us focused. As the day wore on, Sam's muscles ached from carrying water and supplies, but he didn't dare rest. Every time Willow whinnied in discomfort, he found himself by her side, stroking her neck the way Martha had taught him. The contractions are getting stronger, Dr. Harper announced as evening approached. She pulled on long surgical gloves and positioned herself near Willow's hindquarters. Sam, I need you at her head. Martha, stay ready with those towels. Willow's labor progressed slowly. Sam murmured encouragement, wiping sweat from her neck as she strained. The minutes stretched into hours, marked by Willow's increasing distress. Suddenly, Dr. Harper's voice sharpened. The foal's leg is caught. We need to adjust its position now. She worked quickly, her arms deep in concentration. Willow let out a pained noise that made Sam's heart clench. Come on, girl, he whispered, feeling utterly helpless as he watched Dr. Harper work. You can do this. Martha pressed a supportive hand to his shoulder as Dr. Harper continued her careful manipulations. After what felt like an eternity, the vet's tense expression softened slightly. There, she said. I've got it repositioned. Now we wait. Sam held his breath, still stroking Willow's neck, praying that Dr. Harper's intervention would be enough to save both mother and foal. The moment seemed frozen in time as the foal finally emerged, small and wet in the lantern light. Dr. Harper worked swiftly, clearing its airways while Martha moved in with warm towels. Sam held his breath until a tiny wheezing sound filled the barn, the foal's first gulp of air. It's alive, Dr. Harper confirmed, though her expression remained focused. But we're not out of the woods yet. The foal lay limply on the straw, its chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Willow stretched her neck toward her baby, nickering softly. Sam had never heard such a gentle sound from her before. The next few hours are critical, Dr. Harper explained, checking the foal's vitals. It's weaker than we'd like. Sam knelt beside the tiny creature, following Martha's instructions on how to dry it properly with the towels. His hands trembled slightly as he worked, careful not to rub too hard against its delicate frame. Let's call you Stormy, he whispered, remembering the tempest that had raged during its birth. You've got to be strong now, little one. Dr. Harper showed Sam how to support Stormy's head, guiding it toward Willow's milk. The first feeding is crucial, she explained. The colostrum contains vital antibodies. Stormy's attempts to nurse were feeble at first, its legs wobbling dangerously. Sam steadied the foal, while Martha encouraged Willow to stand still. Minutes stretched into hours as they coaxed and supported the newborn. That's it, Martha murmured as Stormy finally latched on, drawing its first real meal. Good boy. The night deepened around them, but nobody left the barn. They watched as Stormy, growing slightly stronger with each passing hour, began to test its legs. Sam's heart leaped when the foal pushed up on trembling limbs, only to collapse back into the straw. Don't rush it, Martha advised, seeing Sam's concern. Every foal finds its feet in its own time. Finally, near midnight, Stormy managed to stand. Its legs splayed awkwardly, like a newborn deer, but it remained upright. The foal took one wobbly step, then another, while Willow watched attentively. Sam sank onto a hay bale, his body heavy with exhaustion, but his heart light. He watched in wonder as Stormy navigated its first steps in the world, each movement a small miracle after such a difficult birth. You did good, Sam, Martha said softly, patting his shoulder. Both of them might not have made it without you. Sam couldn't find words to respond. He simply watched mother and foal together, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd witnessed. The morning after Stormy's birth brought an unexpected stream of visitors to the farm. Cars and trucks kicked up dust along the driveway as locals arrived, their arms full of supplies and home-cooked meals. Sam watched in amazement as they gathered near the barn, speaking in hushed, excited tones. "We heard about the foal," Mrs. Thompson from the feed store said, holding out a basket of fresh muffins. "Thought you could use some breakfast after that long night." Martha helped Sam manage the flow of well-wishers, letting small groups peek into the stall, where Willow stood protectively over Stormy. The foal's coat was beginning to dry properly, revealing patches of white that matched its mother's markings. "Just like the old days," someone remarked, their voice thick with nostalgia. "Remember when your grandfather helped deliver twins during that terrible winter storm?" Sam listened as stories flowed freely among the visitors. Tales of his grandparents' dedication, of horses saved and lives changed, painted a picture of what the farm had meant to these people. Each memory shared seemed to breathe new life into the weathered barn walls. Jake, the teenage volunteer, pressed his face against the stall door, his eyes wide with wonder. "Mr. Morris," he said, turning to Sam, "could I maybe come by after school to help? I want to learn everything about taking care of them." The boy's enthusiasm reminded Sam of the journal entries describing young volunteers who had found their calling at the farm. "My father learned everything he knew about horses right here," Jake explained eagerly. "He said your grandfather gave him his first chance to work with animals." As the afternoon wore on, the visitors gradually departed, leaving behind not just supplies, but a sense of renewed purpose. Sam stood in the barn doorway, watching Willow and Stormy in their stall. The foal wobbled over to its mother, pressing its small head against her neck in a gentle nuzzle. Willow responded with a soft nickering sound that seemed to fill the barn with warmth. The sight stirred something deep in Sam's chest. This wasn't just about saving one horse anymore. In the span of a few weeks, he had somehow become part of something larger, a legacy that had touched countless lives in this community. His decision to stay, made in a moment of crisis on a rainy night, had done more than rescue a horse and her foal. It had rekindled a flame that had nearly gone out. The days following Stormy's birth brought new energy to the farm. Sam spent his mornings checking on the foal's progress, marveling at how quickly the wobbly legs grew steady and strong. During quiet moments, he would spread his grandfather's blueprints across the kitchen table, studying the careful drawings of expanded stalls and training areas. "These plans are still good," Martha said one morning, pointing to the detailed sketches. "Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing with the layout." Sam nodded, tracing the lines with his finger. "We could start with the north side of the barn. There's enough space there for at least 4 more stalls." The next volunteer day drew twice as many people as before. Trucks filled with lumber and supplies lined the driveway, and the sound of hammers and saws filled the air. Jake, wearing work gloves that seemed slightly too big for his hands, organized a group of teenagers to tackle the fence repairs. "Remember to check every post," he called out, demonstrating the proper technique Martha had taught him. His enthusiasm was contagious, and soon the younger volunteers were competing to see who could fix the most fence posts. Martha supervised another group in the barn, directing the cleaning and painting efforts. The old wooden walls soaked up the fresh paint like they'd been thirsting for care. As layers of dust were swept away, the barn's sturdy bones emerged, strong and true, beneath years of neglect. During a water break, one of the volunteers discovered something behind a tangle of overgrown bushes. "Hey, look at this," they called out. Several people helped pull away the vegetation, revealing an old wooden sign. Though weathered, the words Haven Farm were still visible beneath the grime. "I remember when your grandfather put that sign up," Martha told Sam, her eyes misty. "He said every animal deserved a haven." The group carefully cleaned the sign, touching up the faded letters with fresh paint. When they mounted it back above the entrance, something clicked into place. The farm felt whole again, like it had found its identity after years of being lost. As evening approached, the volunteers gathered in the farmyard to admire their work. The newly painted barn glowed in the setting sun, and the restored sign welcomed visitors just as it had decades ago. Willow and Stormy grazed peacefully in their paddock, surrounded by fresh fencing. Sam stood among the tired but satisfied workers, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer evening. These people had given their time and energy not just to help him, but to restore something they all believed in. Looking around at the smiling faces, paint-splattered clothes, and tired but happy expressions, he realized Haven Farm wasn't just his inheritance, it was his home. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the barn floor as Sam made his way through his daily routine. He carried fresh hay and water, his footsteps echoing in the familiar space. As he approached Willow's stall, he stopped, struck by the sight before him. Stormy stood tall in the middle of the stall, his gangly legs no longer wobbling, but planted firmly on the ground. The foal's coat gleamed in the streaks of sunlight that filtered through the barn slats, and his bright eyes darted curiously around the space. Willow stood nearby, alert but relaxed, watching her offspring with what Sam could only describe as maternal pride. "Well, look at you," Sam said softly, leaning against the stall door. Stormy's ears perked up at his voice, and the foal took a few confident steps toward him. Sam felt his chest tighten with emotion at how far the tiny horse had come from those first precarious hours. After checking that both horses were ready, Sam opened the stall door and carefully led them out. The morning dew still clung to the grass as they made their way to the pasture. Willow walked steadily beside him, while Stormy pranced impatiently at the end of his lead rope. When they reached the gate, Sam's hands trembled slightly with excitement as he unclipped their leads. This was a milestone he'd been looking forward to, their first real time in the open pasture. Stormy hesitated for just a moment before bursting forward into the field, his small hooves kicking up joy with every stride. The sight of the young foal racing through the grass brought an unexpected lump to Sam's throat. Stormy kicked up his heels, testing his newfound freedom with unbridled enthusiasm. He chased his own shadow, stopped to sniff wildflowers, and then took off running again, his tail held high like a victory flag. Willow grazed nearby, keeping a watchful eye on her adventurous offspring, but seeming to understand that this was his moment to explore. The morning sun warmed the pasture, and butterflies danced above the grass, catching Stormy's attention. The foal began to chase them, his movements becoming more coordinated with each playful bound. Sam settled himself on the fence, content to watch the scene unfold. The farm felt different now, vibrant and full of life. He remembered the rainy night when he'd found Willow, how close they'd come to a different ending. The empty buildings and overgrown fields had seemed like too much to handle then. But now, watching Stormy leap and play in the same fields where his grandfather's rescue horses once roamed, Sam felt the rightness of it all. The once silent property now rang with the sounds of life. Birds singing in the repaired barn eaves, the soft whoosh of horses moving through grass, and the occasional excited whinny from Stormy as he discovered something new. The freshly painted buildings and mended fences stood as testimony to the work that had been done, but it was the spirit of the place that had truly been restored. Sam stood nervously at the makeshift podium in front of the barn, his grandfather's worn leather journal clutched in his hands. Old photographs lined the walls behind him, showing the farm in its glory days, horses running free, smiling volunteers, and his grandparents standing proudly in front of the newly painted Haven Farm sign. This place wasn't just a farm, Sam began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. It was a sanctuary where broken things became whole again. He opened the journal, sharing stories of rescued horses that had gone on to become champions, and of how the community had once rallied around his grandparents' mission. The small crowd grew quiet as Sam read excerpts from his grandfather's writings. Many nodded in recognition at the names and places mentioned, while others wiped away tears as they remembered the farm's impact on their lives. Martha sat in the front row, beaming with pride as Sam showed recent photos of Willow and Stormy alongside the old ones. The contrast between the abandoned property he'd inherited and what it had become was striking. To Sam's surprise, people began raising their hands, eager to contribute. Mr. Johnson from the hardware store offered building supplies for new stalls. Mrs. Peterson, who owned the local garden center, volunteered to help restore the herb garden that had once provided natural remedies for the animals. Then Jake stepped forward, his hands shaking slightly as he faced the crowd. "I used to ride my bike past this place every day," he said, his young voice clear and earnest. "I always wondered what it would be like to work with animals. Now, thanks to Sam, I know. This farm, it's teaching me things I never thought I'd learn. About responsibility, about not giving up when things get tough." Jake's words touched something deep in the audience. More people stood up, sharing their own memories of the farm and offering to help bring it back to life. Someone suggested starting a monthly newsletter to keep the community updated on the farm's progress. Another proposed organizing regular volunteer days. The energy in the room was electric. Sam watched in amazement as his small event transformed into something bigger, a community coming together around a shared purpose. People clustered around the old photographs, swapping stories and making plans. As the crowd began to thin, Sam slipped away to the barn. He found Willow and Stormy in their stall, their faces peaceful in the fading light. Willow's gentle eyes met his, and Stormy pressed his velvet nose against Sam's hand. Standing there, surrounded by the legacy he'd inherited and the future he was building, Sam felt a profound connection to his grandfather. He ran his hand along the smooth wood of the stall door, thinking of all the hours his grandfather must have spent in this very spot, caring for animals in need. "Thank you," he whispered. The words meant for more than just the horses. He was thanking his grandfather, whose vision had created this place and whose journal had helped guide Sam back to it. The autumn breeze rustled through the newly repaired barn as Sam leaned against the doorframe, watching Jake demonstrate proper grooming techniques to a group of younger volunteers. Willow stood patiently as the kids learned to brush her coat, while Stormy pranced around the paddock with two other rescued horses, a former racing stallion with a healing leg and an elderly mare who'd been saved from neglect. "Remember to be gentle around the legs," Jake explained, his confidence a far cry from the nervous teenager who'd first arrived at the farm. "Horses can be sensitive there." Sam smiled, remembering his own clumsy first attempts at horse care. Now the barn gleamed with fresh paint and new equipment. The stalls were clean and comfortable, and the sound of happy animals filled the air. The transformation wasn't just in the buildings, it was in the people too. Back in the farmhouse, Sam sorted through his mail, pausing at an official-looking envelope from his old trucking company. Inside, a formal letter outlined their offer: his old route, better pay, even a signing bonus if he returned within the month. A few months ago, this would have been tempting. The security of a steady paycheck, the familiar routine of the open road. Sam chuckled softly and slid the letter into his desk drawer. Instead of a response, he pulled out a fresh piece of paper and began drafting his proposal for Haven Farm's new youth program. His pen moved quickly as he outlined his vision. Weekly classes teaching animal care, responsibility, and compassion. He thought of Jake and how working with the animals had given him direction and purpose. As evening approached, Sam joined Martha on the wraparound porch, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the pasture. Stormy, now nearly grown, galloped playfully with his new companions, his dark coat gleaming in the fading light. "Would you look at that?" Martha said, nodding toward the field. "Who would have thought that scared little foal would turn out so strong?" Sam watched as Stormy kicked up his heels, leading the other horses in what looked like a game of tag. Willow grazed nearby, keeping a maternal eye on the proceedings. The sight of them, healthy and happy, filled Sam's chest with warmth. "Sometimes," Sam said, "I still can't believe this is real." He gestured to the restored buildings, the well-maintained fences, and the new sign that stood proudly at the entrance. The freshly painted letters proclaimed, "Haven Farm, a sanctuary for all," the gold lettering catching the last rays of sunlight. Martha patted his hand. "Your grandfather would be proud, Sam. You've brought his dream back to life." If you enjoyed the story of Sam and Willow, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.